Welcome to Four Kitchens Presents. Today we have Todd Ross-Nienkerk. He is the CEO and co-founder of Four Kitchens. For the last 10 years, Todd has been building big websites for big audiences with complex content needs. So we're long past the days of static web pages where online experiences replicated books and magazines. Today's content has to be dynamic and deliverable to multiple devices in multiple formats. So how best can we do that? Well, Todd is going to tell us in this webinar, The Future of the CMS. So take it away, Todd.
Thank you very much, Doug, for that lovely introduction. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the future of the CMS. We're going to talk about decoupled architecture, multiple front ends, and content as a service. My name is Todd Ross-Nienkerk. I am CEO, co-founder, and digital strategist at Four Kitchens. If you'd like to get a hold of me later, you can email me at todd@fourkitchens.com, or you can tweet at me at Todd Ross. Again, the hashtag we're using for this webinar is Future CMS. So why are we here today? I'm here because I want you to rethink how we manage, publish, and consume content. We're going to talk about three big things today. We're going to talk about what decoupled means. Some people call this headless. We're going to talk about when decoupling actually makes sense. Hint, it doesn't always. And we're going to talk about what's next for content in the web. There's some pretty cool stuff happening out there, and I want to start talking about some of the things that we at Four Kitchens see on the horizon. So what do we mean by decoupled? A lot of you may have heard of things like decoupled CMSs or headless Drupal or headless WordPress or things like that. So let's start with what we currently have. This is currently the kind of CMS architecture that most of us are familiar with. This could be Drupal or WordPress or any number of things that you might be using. There's a front end and a back end. So the front end is what people see when they go to your website. It's your URL, it's your blog, it's whatever. It's the stuff that the reader or the audience sees. And then there's the back end. And the back end is where all of that stuff is stored, and that may also include the editorial interface. So if you're an admin of a site or the editor of a site, this is where you go to do your work. So on the front end, we are delivering experiences to laptops and tablets and phones, and there's probably some kind of a feed, an RSS feed or something attached to the content accessible through RSS on your website. On the back end, we're usually juggling things like a lot of heavy text-based content, like blog posts and articles and data and things like that. Also, images, video, audio, multimedia assets, and of course, user-generated content and often user profiles as well. So this is what we mean between the front end and the back end. So here we are. This is the state of things as we've all come to know them. The idea of decoupling is when we separate the front end from the back end so that the front end becomes a kind of head. It is the thing that looks outward into the world. It's the thing that people see when they go to your site. And then there's the body, and that's where all of your content is stored, and that's where you do all of your editing and maintenance of the site. And this separation is what we're referring to when we say decoupled or headless. The fact that these are now actually two completely different software systems that are connected. Now, when we think of front ends and back ends, the most common front end that we tend to think about is, of course, the web. But the web is really just one of many potential front ends that will distribute your content to users in different contexts and experiences. So you may have native apps on iPhone, Android, whatever. You might now currently, cough, cough, be worried about Google AMP as a potential front end as well. You might have various feeds, not just RSS, but all kinds of other feeds, JSON, RESTful APIs where you need to send your content outward. You may have separate screen readers or other experiences for assistive devices. You might be working with gaming consoles like Xbox. Many people these days watch a lot of video content on Xboxes and PlayStation. More television content here on smart TVs. That includes streaming devices. So it could be Samsung Smart TV, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire, Chromecast, all of that stuff. And lately, there are conversational interfaces, audio interfaces like Alexa. So you might have some content. If you're, say, a radio station or somebody like Spotify, you have a lot of content stored on the back end that you want to then play and stream to people through audio devices like Alexa or any other kind of streaming device. So here are all these different front ends in green here surrounding the back end, which is storing all the content, and it's connected through an API. So in this new world, in this future of the CMS, all of these front ends are first-class citizens. It's not the website that's a first-class citizen and then everything spins off of it. The website is merely one of many front ends connected directly to the back end, and of course, the back end is your content, and that is where everything starts. So this is what decoupled looks like. So when does it make sense? It doesn't always make sense. Let's talk about some examples where it does. So let's say you're the kind of organization that wants to adopt cutting-edge front-end technologies. You might be a technology organization, or you might be a gaming company, or you might have a really tech-savvy audience, and so you always need to be adopting various front-end technologies and keeping pace with that. And in some cases, it may not even be cutting edge. It may be that you simply need to use well-established and modern front-end technologies, but your CMS hasn't been keeping pace. So when we look at the current state of most CMSs, where the back end and the front end are glued together, you might see something like this. And Drupal is a relatively good example of this kind of setup. You have a back end that is safe, it's repeatable, there are known solutions and expected results, it's tested in the enterprise. And likewise, the front end too is safe and repeatable with known solutions and expected results. The thing is, though, this is a little bit boring and it tends to get dusty pretty quickly because the world of front end is moving very, very quickly as new devices and experiences come online. Things like, a version of jQuery that's 2 major releases old makes things really difficult for people, especially in the Drupal world, for example, to really keep pace with what's happening on the front end. So this can be boring or potentially just out of date and obsolete. We could go the other direction and adopt full bleeding edge technologies with rich experiences and high risk and high reward. We might find some brand new CMS that some genius kid out of high school decided to put together because all other CMSs suck. Well, in situations like this, we're working with something that is potentially dangerous. So the front end here, that's kind of interesting, but on the back end, do you really want bleeding edge technology powering your enterprise site when you really potentially want a safe, repeatable, known, and expected solution? So this is where we arrive at separating the two and implementing different technologies for the back end and front end. So on the back end, you do, of course, want something safe, repeatable, known, and expected. And then on the front end, if it's a completely different system, you have the option to adopt bleeding edge technologies for rich experience, high risk, high reward. This is the Goldilocks solution. It's just right, not too boring and not too dangerous. This is one example in which decoupling might make sense for you. Decoupling may also make sense if you want to separate your upgrades from your redesigns. So currently in a coupled system, every time we want to launch a new CMS or upgrade it, we may as well do a redesign. So using another example from the world of Drupal, every time there is a major Drupal release from 4 to 5 to 6 to 7, and especially in the case of 8, the front-end templating system is completely different, or it requires a massive rewrite. And at that point, you may as well just go ahead and roll in a redesign of your site, refresh some of the look and feel, maybe do a completely new branding, because you're going to have to rebuild it from scratch anyway, right? So this sticks around for a couple of years, then it's time to upgrade the CMS because it's out of date, and while you're there, you may as well do a redesign. Same story, same story. We repeat this every 2 to 5 years. Every time we want to upgrade a CMS or switch to a new CMS, we have to do a complete redesign. And obviously, these are very expensive propositions. You are looking at potentially having to raise a capital expense every time you want to either upgrade the CMS or do a redesign within a coupled system. When you decouple, however, you can separate those upgrades and redesigns. So here, of course, you want to relaunch a new platform, so you've got to do a redesign, a new CMS. Your new CMS powers the back end. You have a different front-end templating engine for the redesign. But if you want to upgrade your CMS, you can do that independently because the only thing connecting the two is an API. You might have to tweak the API a little bit to work with the new CMS, but because your front-end system is not changing, it does not have to be rewritten. It can stay as is. And you might just have to update some of the glue, the API that sticks the two together. But then you can do a redesign independently, then upgrade your CMS, and then do a redesign. Now, this approach isn't necessarily cheaper. You may still be spending the same amount of money over a certain period of time, but you get to better throttle your costs. So rather than looking at a major capital expense around a new CMS or upgrade every 2 to 5 years, you're looking at upgrading the back end and then the front end in alternating years, which makes it a lot easier to justify costs to, say, a board or investors or your boss. Decoupling also helps you keep pace with front-end technology. Just as in the example before, it may be that when you relaunch your website, you say, hey, you know what, that was neat and all, but I've heard about this thing called Angular. I want to try that. Well, now React is the hot new thing. Backbone is back. Hey, I heard about Ember. Meanwhile, let's do a quick upgrade of our CMS, and then along comes Polymer, right? So you can constantly be switching front-end technologies, and in these cases, you're mainly just working with HTML, CSS, JavaScript. You're not dealing with a super heavy-duty templating engine provided by the CMS. Decoupling also allows multiple front ends and experiences. So here's where things get really neat. So when you launch your new CMS with your headless or decoupled architecture, you have this web redesign on the front end, one of your endpoints, and then you can focus on your iOS app. Now notice you're not having to launch an entirely new CMS to power your iOS app, because you have created a content API that pulls content from your CMS and makes it accessible to an iOS app natively. So there's not a lot of backend stuff that you have to do at this point if you have a well-defined content API. Then you may say, hey, we're getting a lot of requests for streaming apps, so let's pick Roku because it's the most widely adopted and democratic platform. Let's make a Roku app. Then you might want to do a redesign of your website, and again, you don't have to upgrade the CMS or anything else. But let's say Drupal 9 comes along. It's time to upgrade your CMS. You're not having to redo any of these front ends at all. They can all stay the same. You're not having to roll forward any of these other backends. And then maybe you decide to launch an Alexa app. So again, it's all independent, and you can focus on specific front ends and experiences one at a time while leveraging a common CMS and content API. Decoupling also makes sense if you need to eliminate the tension between a design and the CMS you have chosen. Now, we've all been in this position, especially the designers in the world who've experienced some frustration, where here you are, the designer, and you're having to kind of drag this CMS around. It's not really clear who's walking whom. What I mean by this is sometimes your design just can't really feasibly or cost effectively be done within whatever CMS platform has been chosen. So sometimes it feels like the CMS is really the one walking you rather than you, the design, walking the CMS. And that's resulted in two very distinct philosophies for designing for a CMS. And this is where things get a little bit troubling. Those of us, like the web chefs at 4 Kitchens, who come from a mainly technical background, tend to take a CMS-first approach. What we mean by that is we believe that the user's needs are very important, but there are many ways to satisfy them. So let's alter the design. Let's change it to align it with the natural behavior of the CMS. And a really good example of this will be, and I'm sure we've all run across this, when a designer hands you some wireframes that has that pesky little pencil icon next to all of the fields. Like here's the title, pencil icon, byline, pencil icon, body, pencil icon. And you ask, of course, knowing what the answer is going to be, what does that pencil icon mean? And the designer says, oh, that's inline editing. Well, inline editing is a bit of a technical nightmare for a lot of CMSs and will result in a lot of custom code and a lot of heavy-duty expense. So we can then, as developers, as CMS experts, say, well, if you want to shave a lot of cost off of your project, we really just need to align with what WordPress or Drupal wants to do out of the box, which is you edit the entire piece of content all at once, all of its fields. The end result then, when you're advocating for the CMS, is easier and cheaper to maintain. So you will have less custom code, You will not have to hack a lot of modules or, God forbid, hack core. But the end result is content or is code base that is just cheaper and easier to maintain, less fragile. The design first philosophy, however, says that the user's needs are paramount, well-researched, and non-negotiable. The design must absolutely be executed as is, and this may happily involve hacking the CMS or creating a complicated code base, which of course affects maintainability. Now, this may sound terrible to people who are really familiar with CMSs, but this is absolutely a valid philosophy. Neither of these two is wrong. And here's the fun part. Decoupling can satisfy both because you have separated the front end from the back end system. With the front end system, you're dealing with an entirely different code base that is back end agnostic. So the user's needs can be met, and you can still have a more maintainable back end code base. Once again, decoupling makes sense if you want to centralize your content. Here's what I mean by that. So again, here we are today. We've got a website. I've got my website here. It's a CMS that has a front end and a back end. The back end stores all of the content. Now, my colleague Sarah over here has her own departmental website. Frank has his, Laura has hers, Bob has his, and we exist in this world of islands where all of us have our own websites, but yet we're all within the same organization. We may all work for the same nonprofit or the same multinational corporation or perhaps departments within a university. And it's very difficult for us to share content because anytime one of these folks around me has an interesting piece of content that I would like to publish on my site, I have to ask for permission or copy and paste. Things get really difficult and you're dealing with a lot of human interaction and overhead. So let's think about how we can apply a decoupled architecture to centralize content. So then let's think about my website as simply being one of many endpoints of a content hub. So there could be one centralized content hub, and my website is merely one of the front-end endpoints. Frank's website is an endpoint, Laura's website is an endpoint, and so is Bob and Sarah's. We are all just endpoints to the same content hub connected with the content API. So let's walk through a real-world example of this. Let's say I work for a university. I work in strategic communications, and my job is to publish really interesting articles about all of the cool stuff that our faculty and students are doing as it relates to research. So I work in strategic communications, or rather, let's say I work in the law school. Better example, I work in the law school, and Sarah works in the medical school. And Sarah publishes a really cool article about the Supreme Court decision to allow gene patenting. So obviously that is a medical issue, it's a biosciences issue. She publishes this piece of content on her site, and it is automatically sent to the Content Hub, and it's tagged with various areas of interest. So this could involve medical, biosciences, genetics, and law. Well, I have access to a dashboard on my site that shows me all of the content stored in the Content Hub that is tagged law. So I log into my Content Hub every morning at 8 o'clock and I'm drinking my coffee and I see an interesting article published over at the medical school that is also related to law. I click a button and I get that piece of content syndicated on my site. Now, this also could include metadata that says the canonical version of this article exists over on Sarah's site, so please don't dock me, Google, for having duplicated content on my site. So this is all well and good, but here's where it gets kind of interesting. Sarah may have made a mistake in one of her citations about a previous court case. Well, that's pretty important, and we're a university and we want to have our facts and research straight. So she makes this change. That change, of course, is automatically propagated to the Content Hub, where it is then automatically propagated to my site because the Content Hub knows that I am syndicating this content. That way, at no point does Sarah have to somehow magically know that I have republished her content and then has to reach out to me to tell me that a change has been made. And likewise, I don't have to keep track of the content on Sarah's site to figure out if she has changed anything. All of this just happens automatically through a centralized content system. again, because we have a decoupled architecture using a content API. So let's say you want to publish to many front ends and experiences simultaneously. Here's the way to do that. Here's our ecosystem of devices and experiences. Again, native apps, websites, screen readers, Xbox, all kinds of stuff. Let's say I publish an article in my Content Hub. Well, an article is not going to be a compelling piece of evidence to all members of these device audiences. So we're going to send that article to all of the appropriate people. We're going to send it to the website, to the feeds, to screen readers to be read aloud, to native apps, maybe AMP. But it doesn't belong on Xbox. It doesn't belong on smart TVs. That's not video content. And for whatever reason, maybe I've decided it's not particularly interesting or relevant content for a conversational interface device like Alexa. But then on the other hand, let's say I have a video, and the video is really interesting and we want to get it out to all channels. Well, let's send that video out to all of the channels where it makes sense. Doesn't really make sense to send a video to a screen reader, especially in the case where the video is really heavy on animations, diagrams, or infographics rather than people speaking. If people were simply speaking in the video, people who require assistive devices, people who can't see, they could simply listen to the video. But if it's heavy duty on animations, you're actually going to need some kind of a transcript that explains exactly what's going on in this video. So that transcript then can be sent to screen readers and conversational interfaces to be read aloud rather than have the video, which is an inherently visual medium, play. Note that this is the exact same story. This is the same piece of content, but you are publishing it to different experiences selectively based on the context of those devices. You may also want to decouple if you are integrating multiple backends or services. And here's what I mean by this. So sometimes you don't just have one backend. And in this case, we simplified our front-end options. We have native apps, website, and Google AMP articles. So you have your content hub in the middle. That's where your apps, website, AMP are getting all of its content. But you may also want to interface with backend services that further enhance the content that you're working with. So perhaps you want to coordinate or rather integrate with OpenCalais for natural language processing and automated tagging. That way you don't have to tag it yourself. This service figures out what your content is all about and assigns it the optimal tags for search or sorting or search engine purposes. You may also be pulling some video directly from a video service. You might be using YouTube or Vimeo's API to filter to actually store the video and host the video, but you're sending it through your content store and then adding metadata on top of it, such as a transcript or a byline or a new title. And then again, of course, you may also have Solr. You have some kind of a search option that indexes your content, reaches directly into the content store, indexes that, stores those indexing results on its own database, but then can be fed through your content API to all of these other services. So it's not just about front-end experiences, it's also about integrating multiple backends. And finally, if you want to make your content easily accessible through an API, you probably should decouple. And here's what that looks like. So again, we have all of our devices and experiences, but let's say this API that we've created here that allows all of these front ends and devices and experiences to connect to your content hub is also made public, publicly documented, publicly available. This then allows maybe your fan base or your constituency or your donors access to building their own sites and tools. Or maybe you are you're an NGO or you are a government entity that is required to make your data publicly accessible. So you need, by regulation or by charter, to release all of your content or data or whatever it is publicly in some fashion. You can leverage the exact same content API that powers your content hub and decoupled architecture, but merely expose it to the public. And this is exactly what we did with Twit. So let's talk about This Week in Tech. This Week in Tech is a very popular podcasting and video casting service that runs on a decoupled Drupal site and content API that we built. When they first came to us, they wanted to do a refresh of their site. They wanted a more modern look and feel. They wanted to do a little bit of rebranding. They wanted a better user experience. But in the process of talking with them about some of the things that they could do, because they really wanted to expand into other devices and experiences, we worked with them to create a content API and a decoupled architecture that would allow them to expand into other devices and other experiences. So I want to, in their own words, from one of the co-founders and hosts, Leo Laporte, talk about why they made the business decision to go headless, to build with us a decoupled organization or a decoupled platform. First reason, it's faster and easier to create new sites. Web design styles change faster than high fashion, so it's nice to be able to update the site without redoing all the hard work on the back end. If you wanted to switch from one JavaScript library to another, you could do that relatively easily and leverage a lot of the markup and CSS that you already have in place. Having a complete API would make it easier to do apps. The app, just like the website, would have access to everything there is to know about Twit in a simple, accessible fashion. The same API that powers your website will power all of your apps. Apps are not treated then as this thing that gets stapled onto your existing website. Then, by making the API public, we, Twit, encourage members of our audience to create new things, things we might never have thought of. You could even design a website you like better. Abstracting the content from the presentation seems like a big win. And in fact, very interestingly, this is exactly what happened. So after the site was launched, Twit, of course, has a very rabid fan base of tech people and designers and people in the web industry who really want to work with new technologies. And by making their API publicly accessible to them, they were able to, maybe just because they wanted to do a proof of concept or a prototype, or because they wanted to build the, quote unquote official app for Twit, they've gone off to create a whole ecosystem of apps. So you can look on Apple TV right now, and there are at least 2 or 3 Twit-related apps created by fans. This is the case on Roku and I'm sure some other devices as well. All of this was made possible because of this decoupled architecture, because of the API that we helped build, and because they have a fan base of people who want to build their own stuff. So their cost of producing apps, because of their very enthusiastic fan base, has gone way down. And finally, he said, by keeping Drupal simple and avoiding additional third-party modules, we can make a more secure and reliable backend that will be much easier to upgrade when future versions of Drupal arrive. So when they are ready to upgrade to Drupal 8, we will do a content migration, maybe a little bit of functionality migration. We'll tweak some of the stuff in the API, and then we're done. There is no theme to rebuild. There is no redesign to have to do. There aren't a huge suite of modules that we have to either port ourselves or wait to be ported to Drupal 8. Here are some links to learn more. This will be available for download later, so don't feel like you need to copy any of this down at the moment. I will note, though, that we built our own open source Node.js powered framework for building decoupled Drupal sites for this project. It's called Saucier. Being the Four Kitchens web chefs, we like to name things after various kitchen utensils and brigade team roles. The Saucier is the chef in the kitchen who makes the secret sauce. So to review all of the reasons when decoupling makes sense. Makes sense when you want to adopt cutting-edge front-end technologies, when you want to separate upgrades from redesigns, when you need to eliminate the tension between a design and your CMS, when you need to centralize your content and share it with multiple departments or sites or endpoints, when you want to publish to many front ends and experiences, say a video of the story goes to one, a podcast episode goes to another, and a text transcript goes to another device, but it's all the same story. When you need to integrate multiple backends or services, and when you need to make your content easily accessible via an API. So I want to talk a little bit about what is next, because here's where things get pretty interesting. Here's where we see things going at For Kitchens. We do a lot of work with content-heavy websites and helping publishers, nonprofits, educational institutions, universities figure out how to best communicate their message to all of their audiences, no matter where they are. So the guiding principle here for the future of the CMS and the future of content is that content comes first. Modern CMSs, as we've come to understand them, manage websites first and content second. When you log into most CMSs, you are greeted with all kinds of stuff involving user management and resetting passwords and looking at analytics and dealing with layouts and all kinds of stuff. It's primarily become a website management tool, and this needs to change. We need to put content management back in content management systems. Therefore, because of this focus on content, content strategy is a requirement for all organizations. And content strategy is not simply what you should say and how you should say it. That's part of it. There is a technical component to content strategy, perhaps the most important of which is content modeling. Content modeling is the process of breaking down all of your content into its component fields and relationships so that you can better reassemble it for new experiences and devices as needed. Some people also refer to this as atomic content, meaning breaking your content down from organisms and molecules into individual atoms that can then be reassembled. We then, of course, the underlying principle here is that we need to fully divorce content from its presentation layer. Content should not be the way in which it is presented. It should be independent from the way in which it is presented so that it can be presented in many different ways without it feeling weird. Like trying to listen to a video on Alexa. You should have a podcast or a description of what's going on for an audio-only device. And this brings us to designing for experiences, not just devices. When iPhone came along and started the mobile revolution, a lot of people thought of design as, well, now I need to make things, I need a smaller screen size. So how do I design my website for a single column or smaller screen environment? But it's not just about the device itself, it's about the experience that people are having while they're using the device. It's the fact that they're touching and scrolling. It's the fact that they are probably multitasking while using a mobile device. I am absolutely guilty of the example I'm about to give you. But in the early days of responsive web design, there was this misinformed notion that the mobile user was somehow frantically wandering the city, trying to look up addresses and phone numbers of businesses and restaurants they were trying to get to, or directions somewhere, or trying to get a train schedule, or buy a last-minute plane ticket or something like that. That somehow if you're mobile, you're walking, you're in a hurry, you're distracted. But guess where the vast majority of people use their phones? It's sitting at their desk with a computer in front of them, or it's sitting on their couch with their laptop beside them and a TV in front of them. Mobile devices are frequently used as your main device or a second or third screen. And therefore, we are not just building for devices, we are building for the experiences around those devices. It's also worth thinking about things like the Amazon Echo and all of the new Alexa-powered devices that Amazon is producing. And I'll get to that in just a moment. Front-end technologies are accelerating, and CMSs cannot keep pace. When you have a large enterprise CMS, or a very, sometimes we call them robust CMSs, meaning somewhat complicated, it takes months or years to make substantial architectural, technological changes to that CMS. So if the flavor of the month for whatever front-end tool is put into Drupal core, then it might be months or years before other options become available or it is replaced. But the front-end world and all of the devices that we're using to interact with content on the web, it's changing so quickly that no CMS can properly keep pace. So as a result, content management systems need to do some soul searching and think about what they're really good at. And what they're good at, again, is content. It's putting the content management back into content management systems. Maybe we should allow the front end to accelerate at its own pace and therefore divorce and decouple the front end from the back end. We are seeing a rise in what I'm just deciding to call website management systems, WMSs. I don't know if that's a real term, but let's go with it. And things like Squarespace or Wix or Weebly. These allow people to rapidly create simple, beautiful, I sound like a Squarespace ad in front of a podcast right now, but simple, beautiful, drag and drop, responsive websites for whatever you need. It could be a small business, it could be a personal website, a blog, whatever. People are going to these services in droves. WordPress.com is another example of something like this, because they're simple and they're in the cloud and they're hosted and they're cheap. So a lot of people are moving to these kinds of systems rather than relying on a more standard content management system that they install and maintain themselves. We're also seeing a return of small static websites. So, way back in the day, in the 90s and early 2000s, we measured websites in terms of the number of pages that they had. Well, in the CMS world, that doesn't really make sense, because what is a page in a CMS? Is it a single URL? Is it a blog post? Is it a view of all of the blog posts? Is it a user profile? It's not really clear. So what we're now seeing is, for people who just want to crank out something quick, like a microsite or a call to action or whatever, many, many, many more small, static, temporary sites with very distinct lifespans that are retired. We're seeing that crop up more and more. So CMSs, again, are for more complicated, more dynamic kinds of applications. There's an increasing move towards reusable and atomized content as organizations put more and more and more of their content on the web, and as it becomes harder and harder and harder to archive or even fully retire and delete content, people want to break it up into more reusable chunks. Maybe they want to atomize their content, meaning defining certain names of departments or tools or schools in a single place, so that when that name changes, it can change everywhere. And in fact, this is something that we did with one of our clients. We worked with the Dean of Research at Stanford University, where there are frequently bits of boilerplate, legal boilerplate or safety protocols, or the name of a lab or the name of a school change from time to time. And it's very important from a legal perspective that that change appear everywhere. And sometimes it's very hard to figure out where that name or paragraph or phrase or whatever is used in a multi-thousand page website. So what we did in their case was we defined various pieces of token content. So a content token might be something like the name of a lab. Well, it might begin as the bioethics lab, but then some major donor comes along, and now it's Sally Smith's bioethics lab. And well, that person is a major donor. You want to make sure that their name and their contributions are remembered and honored. So you want that to change universally across all of your content. So you change it in one place, and every place where it appears, because you're using tokens rather than the actual name of the lab, it instantly changes everywhere. So this goes for large paragraphs of content, reusable content. Also, if you want to reuse content across channels. So if you want certain paragraphs to appear on Facebook Instant Articles and Google AMP, but not on the main website, this is a way to maintain all of that in one place in an atomized environment. We're now also seeing a rise of conversational interfaces. Now, a lot of this started with, OK Google, Google's on-site audio search, Siri. Now we have Alexa, which is Amazon's audio interface. These are a lot of us are tempted, just as I was tempted back in the day, to think that people using mobile devices are in a hurry and running around and rushed and they need to get to things quickly. We tend to think that somehow Siri or these other tools are kind of like toys, like, hey Alexa, play NPR, or hey Alexa, play me some country music, whatever. We kind of think of it as like a neat little toy, and it's kind of gadgety, and oh look, we can make Siri tell us a joke or whatever. The thing is, though, if you look at actual use patterns, Younger people in the United States, 20-somethings, teenagers, when they search, when they pick up their mobile device and perform a web search, they do it by speaking the search. They're not typing the search. And this is a bit of a bellwether. The next generation of users will have grown up talking to computers rather than typing in them or using a mouse or navigating through menus or things like this. And that's going to become really profound. We may also, at some point in the future, not to scare you too much, but when we get to the point where we can simply ask a computer, hey, bring up the latest profit and loss statement, from the last quarter, and it brings up the statement, you're like, okay, show me the quarter before that. It's a world in which computers learn to use us rather than we learn to use computers. And that's potentially really powerful because it's like talking to an expert. It's like talking to a consultant that you have and saying, hey, what's the best content management system to use? And it just simply looks up statistics and it figures out, based on what it knows about you and your job, and it'll tell you, just like an expert might. So in worlds like that, we might have fully mic'd homes and offices that are listening to us, like being on the bridge of the enterprise, waiting for us to ask a question and then responding to us. It's a little scary. It's a little Google glassy in terms of privacy concerns, but younger people are more and more accustomed to that kind of environment. Additionally, I always, in thinking about conversational interfaces, I always thought, I hate the idea of talking to my phone or my computer, because isn't that why texting is popular? Because then you don't have to call somebody and make noise and make a spectacle of yourself in the street or in your cubicle or whatever. Like, texting is quiet and it's unobtrusive. Well, there are sub-vocalization mics that can pick up small, almost microscopic movements in your larynx and jaw and tongue and transcribe that to text without you having even spoken aloud. So even that barrier has been broken. So all of that is kind of like future shock, right? But here's where it's actually happening today. So a conversational interface is not just speaking aloud or being spoken to. It's actually the same thing as something like a chatbot. It's the way people now search on Google. I mean, how many of you have dropped a search into Google that says, how do I repair my door? Well, you're not searching door repair, right? You're searching, how do I repair my door? That is a conversational interface because you're asking a computer the same way that you would ask a person. We are all already doing this. So when we built the Amazon Echo app for NBC, which was released a few months back, we had to make a minor change to their content structure, to their content model. And this is where conversational interfaces meet the world of content management. In content management, you need to do two things for conversational interfaces. You have to have a library of predicted questions or sentiments. So you have to map those out. People who use the NBC skill on Alexa will want to know what's on TV tonight, who's on Jimmy Fallon, who's the host on SNL, whatever, right? Those need to be questions that are ready to go in some kind of a content management system and cataloged with paths for a response. So you have to create a little bit of a pathway there. Additionally, when you arrive at the data you want to send them, so when you ask the Amazon Echo, hey Alexa, what's on NBC tonight? It then queries a Drupal site that has a field in it that is specifically written for Alexa. So prior to this field being written, if you were to ask Alexa what's on NBC tonight, it would go to the schedule portion of the content management system, and it would read the schedule field aloud literally. And it would sound like this. Tonight on NBC, Saturday Night Live, 11:30/10:30 Central Standard Time, or CST. Now that doesn't quite sound very natural when a computer speaks that to you, because it said the slash and it used this abbreviation. So we created a new field, which is the spoken aloud conversational kind of interface field. And instead of using slash and abbreviations and things like that, we just rewrite that same statement as tonight, Saturday Night Live, hosted by whoever, is on at 11:30, pause, 10:30 Central. Exactly as you'd hear it said on broadcast TV. So this is where content modeling and atomized content becomes very useful for designing for multiple experiences, such as conversational interfaces. No talk about content and the future of the web would be complete without the obligatory virtual and augmented reality mention. This is partly on my mind because I had the pleasure of messing around with an HTC Vive a couple weeks ago, and it absolutely blew me away. This stuff is so cool. It's definitely going to happen. This is absolutely a thing. No kidding this time, for real. But what does it mean for the web? Its use currently in gaming and entertainment for 360 video and stuff like that is obvious. Like, you can do really cool photography and really cool videography and some cool gaming experiences. All of that is very obvious. But okay, how does that relate then to our clients and how they do things on the web? Well, there are some potentially really interesting journalism applications where you might be walking with a journalist and attending a press conference or a march or something in 360-degree video live, with the ability to interact with them and ask questions or things like that. You may have a better commerce experience. So imagine a world in which you could shop for sofas and pop on a VR headset and actually see the sofa in your home. You could figure out if it fits. You could see if the color matches the whatever, the wall, the floor. You could pick it up and move it to the other side of the room. You could spin it around in the air. You want to see what now this new end table and this lamp and all of this. And perhaps this sounds familiar because it's awfully like that scene in Fight Club where, spoiler alert, Tyler Durden is walking through his apartment and this fake IKEA catalog kind of pops out with all of the price details and descriptions of items and all of that. This is possible today in VR with a pass-through camera on the front, creating an augmented reality commerce environment. And all of this commerce data is stored in a content management system. This is absolutely possible, and it's pretty neat. So that's a lot to think about. That's where we see things going. I'd love to hear if you have any questions.